Sorry, no video yesterday. I was too tired when I got home, so put it off for this morning. I want to talk about the situation with Poland and Ukraine. Now, the Russians are claiming that the U.S. plays this kind of game too. They say, oh, well, we have this intelligence report that we're declassifying because we think the world needs to know Poland is going to invade Ukraine, potentially, and annex part of Western Ukraine, presumably the part of Western Ukraine that was taken from Poland after World War II. Most notably, the city that the Ukrainians call Lviv, the city that the Austrians called Lemberg, that the Russians called Lvov, and I believe the Poles, the way it's spelled, it's Lwow in Polish, so I think that's also Lvov. I don't speak Polish, though. But from what I understand, after World War I and the Austrian Empire was carved up into a million pieces, the piece that had Lemberg, not all of Galicia, but a large chunk of Galicia, went to Poland. And this became part of the Second Polish Republic, which existed from the end of World War I through 1939, start of World War II. After World War II, a good chunk of all of Poland was moved west. People don't really realize that. If you look at it on a map before and after, Poland used to be a country that was further east in Europe. The Soviets wanted to expand their frontiers. They wanted to expand their borders west so that they had more of a buffer. And so they took Poland and they pushed it, into Germany. And so the eastern half of Poland today was the western half of Poland before, and there's a whole big chunk. It's also much smaller now than it used to be, and part of the way that they just took away part of Poland's size, its gross landmass, was by annexing a southern part of Poland and adding it onto western Ukraine. Now, this also was an area where people like Stepan Bandera and other Ukrainian nationalists and partisans were quite active, fighting against the Nazis, fighting against the Soviets, and fighting against, I think, just the local Polish population. What is today called Lviv, I believe, at the time was a majority Polish city, or at least the Poles made up the plurality of the population. There had been a lot of fighting there and ethnic tensions going back to the end of World War I. The different ethnic groups wanted to gain control of that city. There was sort of a civil war within the city itself. In the twilight of World War I, as they realized, hey, this is going to be up for grabs, and the Poles and the Ukrainians went at it with each other. I don't think that the Germans, wherever super serious contenders for taking control of the city, I think that their numbers were probably always too small. But the Poles and the Ukrainians fought viciously at the end of World War I and during World War II over control of this region. And so the case that the Russians are making is that the Poles still want this land. They still want their city back. They hold resentment against the Ukrainians for what they did to them during World War II. The Ukrainians during World War II certainly did massacre a lot of Poles and ethnically cleanse them. That's why Western Ukraine is Ukrainian now. Used to be quite a mix. Not only were there, Germans and Jews, which were expelled as a result of World War II, or killed in the case of a lot of the Jews, but there were Poles there too. Galicia was not just some Ukrainian wonderland, and its capital was far from being an ethnically pure, Ukrainian metropolis. Yet that is largely what the city is today. It is seen as the stronghold of Ukrainian nationalism. It is where all of the Western media is camped out. It's considered to be, hey, this is the safest city because this is the most Ukrainian place in Ukraine. So with all that background out of the way, I am skeptical of what the Russians are saying. I don't just take their word for anything. So I don't take the word of folks in any intelligence agency for granted. I've been burned too many times by my own government and its intelligence agencies, and I'm used to intelligence agencies just, if they ever put something out publicly, they're trying to manipulate, which doesn't mean that what they're saying is outright a lie, although oftentimes it is outright a lie. It just means that there is more to what they're not just trying to inform the public. It's never it. So, at this point, I'm on a, I'll believe it when I see it kind of basis. Now, do I think that what the Russians are saying is impossible? No, especially because the Poles themselves are saying that they will be conducting, military drills in eastern and potentially, southeastern Poland. That would position those troops quite well to serve as an invasion force. But, I've heard this for many, many years about countries. Every time that a country does military drills, people say, "Oh, well, that's just a cover for an invasion force." I remember there was a few years ago, maybe 2019, 2018, somewhere around there, was quite a few years ago, where the Russians were doing, drills in the Eastern Military District, and all the Russiacators at the time were talking a lot about this and saying how, hey, look, this is cover. Russia is about to invade Poland. They're going to take over Poland and Finland, and this is all a cover. It's all a sham. Look at it. Russia's moving around troops right on NATO's doorstep. And of course, it turned out to just be drills, not the real thing. Same thing. In South Korea, the North Koreans always, say, "Oh, well, look, the U.S. they're doing these drills with South Korea. That's an invasion force," and then the invasion never comes. But the truth of the matter is that these drills, they're drilling for an invasion, or a war with those bordering countries. That is why they do these drills. But I mean, you can't really fault a military for preparing to do something. I mean, that's a normal thing. That's what militaries do. They drill all the time. Hopefully they never actually have to put those drills into practice, but that is what militaries do. So I don't think that it's nefarious in and of itself, or shocking, that the Poles would be drilling to invade Ukraine. Even though it is a little more provocative to do it while there is a war going on next door, you would think, well, maybe we should put this off. But then again, it might be more urgent than ever to do your military drills while there's an ongoing war if there's a chance that you could get sucked into it. So we really have to wait for this to happen, see if the Poles do indeed move into Ukraine, and if they don't, these were just drills. And, to be honest, I think it's clear based off Putin's speech from last week, in which he was talking about lightning strikes, or I don't know, some people are translating this blitzkrieg or something like that. I think what he meant was like he's going to launch missiles if anybody tries to intervene in the war. And then they put out this stuff. I think that the Russians are probably trying to deter the Poles from doing something. So who knows? Maybe the Poles were planning to do this, and if they are successfully deterred, these military exercises will remain just that. They will remain exercises and drills. They will not turn into a real invasion of Ukraine. But again, when you see these sorts of things, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I was very skeptical when the U.S. was telling us, okay, Russia's going to invade Ukraine, and we know they're going to do that, and we're calling out. We're saying, and we're calling them out now to try and deter them. That's what the U.S. said at the time. Ned Price, he was the spokesman for, I believe, the State Department, a former spook, and he said, "Well, this is about deterrence." And people were really fed up by that because we really didn't. People were not in the mood to believe the intelligence folks anymore, because they gave no evidence other than, "Hey, this is just some intelligence report that we have. Russia's going to invade Ukraine." Everybody's like, "Okay, yeah, right. You boy who cries wolf." And Ned Price's point was that, well, this is supposed to be about deterrence. We want to say that we know that they're going to do it in the hopes that that they won't do it, if they know that they've been found out. So, it's a way of saying, we can claim victory either way. We can say we were right, because if we say that they're going to do it and then they don't, well, then we successfully deterred them. And if we say that they're going to do it and they do, well, obviously we were right. And so I'm sure Russia plays the same game. It's a very similar sort of thing, which again, in the case of, the U.S. intelligence and, back in February or January, whenever this was, saying that, okay, the Ruskies are going to charge into Ukraine, that did end up coming to pass. So I don't want to rule out what the Russians are saying about Poland either. I thought it was unlikely that the Russians invaded Ukraine, and I think it's unlikely that the Poles invade Ukraine either. But obviously, the first one was not impossible. It was quite possible, and it happened. And the second thing is quite possible. It would seem somewhat strange because the Poles have been Ukraine's greatest ally in this war, supposedly. But they could very easily move into Ukraine under the guise of trying to help them. Because the Poles, I don't think would characterize their actions as an invasion and annexation of Western Ukraine. And the Russians are saying this as well. The Poles will portray these as peacekeepers. Now, if the Poles do go ahead with it, I hope that the Ruskies let them. I hope that the Russians do not react, with force. I hope that what Putin said about, lightning strikes or blitzkrieg or whatever it was that he said exactly. I don't speak Russian, so I'm not sure on the translation. I hope that he doesn't fall through with that, because if I were in his shoes, I would be looking at Western Ukraine as a burden, as a burden that I would not want to take on, because Western Ukraine it's the locus of anti-Russian sentiment in that country. So I would want to cleave it off, isolate it, get it out of my way, never have to deal with it. And the downside to that is that, well, left to its own devices, it would turn into, a neo-Nazi wonderland. It would turn into, an Idlib province in the middle, landlocked in Eastern Europe. And so if the Poles go in there, they will serve as a moderating force, because say what you will about the Poles, they're no fans of, the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterspartei, or however you say that in German. They're not a fan of World War II German politics. And so if the Poles take over, they will likely install, some kind of, Ukrainian nationalist government. But it will be one that I would think the Poles would ensure is free of real Nazis. Now, I don't know how easily it is to separate, Nazism from Ukrainian nationalism. It seems that for historical purposes, they are closely intertwined. It is a part of their national myth that, in World War II, they fought against the Ruskies on the side of the Nazis. So I don't know if you can remove that historical link and create a new Nazi-free Ukrainian nationalism, but let the Poles deal with that problem. That will be their problem if they're the ones who, if they become the occupying power there. Whereas if the Russians take over, there is no way that they could, reform Western Ukraine without lots and lots of violence that will ultimately just beget more violence. So I would hope that the Russians are encouraging this, and that they just let the Poles move in, because long term I think that would be best for everyone, best for peace. I mean, the Russians at this point are going to go all the way to Odessa, all the way to Transnistria. Seems pretty certain. They likely will leave Kiev and everything to its west, everything across the Dnieper, or how do you say that? The Dnieper? I don't know. I don't try and speak these Slavic languages. there were a lot of people, I guess, saying, like Scott Ritter, saying, "Oh no, Putin's got to march all the way to Lviv and tear down that Bandera statue." And I thought, oh my God, that would be a terrible idea. That's utter nonsense. No insult, I guess, to Scott Ritter. Obviously, he has a lot more knowledge on these things than I do, but I just think in terms of, like, if you want to go in and conquer an area, you don't want to alienate the people you're conquering. You want to subdue them. You want to make them amenable to your terms. You want to extract whatever wealth you can from them without killing the host. Because I think I've said this before. The relationship between the state and its people is a parasitic one. A parasite can't kill the host, and it can't make the host so agitated and so annoyed that it rips the parasite off its back and throws it into a lake. Because it's not a traditional master-slave relationship with the state. It can often devolve into that, and I think that the state wants you to think of them as a big bad master. But at the end of the day, the state is small in number, small in terms of overall resources when you compare them to the populace at large. And so that's why I think they're much more akin to a parasite. Parasites are small, they're weak, and they suck the life out of you. And the parasite can cause you a lot of pain if it wants to. But if it causes you enough pain, you'll rise up and you will pick that tick, out from under your armpit and flush it down the toilet. And so I think that the Russians will have their hands full with pacifying the areas of Ukraine along the Black Sea. That the idea that they would move into the West, to a region that overtly hates them and everything that they're about, and feels that they share no common history with the Russians, which Western Ukraine really doesn't. You think about, Lemberg was an Austrian city. It was never a Russian city. It was a Polish city. It was, arguably, I don't know. I don't know if there's much of an argument that the Ukrainians built, Lviv and its architecture and all these things. Maybe there is in Ukrainian national circles, but as far as I'm concerned, I look at the cities on the map in Western Ukraine. I see Stanislav, I see Lemberg. These are Polish and Austrian, imperial. And again, the Austrian Empire was multi-ethnic. So when I say Austrian, I don't necessarily mean German. But these are not cities I associate with Russia, and they're not cities that I associate with, a great past Ukrainian empire. The Ukrainians were there, but they never had a leadership role. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.